What you're looking at is the new PSB Alpha P5 bookshelf loudspeaker. It retails for $350 a pair, and even though it was just introduced, there are already people within this community who claim that this is one of the best loudspeakers that you can buy for $500 or less. So let's talk about it. Okay, so to kick off this review, I want to share just a little bit of history about PSB with you all because I think this is very valuable information. Not only does it help to give you an appreciation for where the company comes from, but it'll also help you to understand what it is they're trying to achieve with their current crop of loudspeakers. So getting right to it, PSB, they've been in the loudspeaker game for quite some time. They were founded in 1972 up in Canada by a gentleman named Paul Barton. And the crazy thing is, he started this company when he was just a teenager. In fact, he and his buddies were fresh out of high school when they decided to start up a loudspeaker business. And really, when you get to know Paul, this isn't that surprising because not only is he very passionate about music, but he's also a musician. He plays the violin, he's played a number of orchestras, participated in a number of competitions, and when you throw in his interest in sound reproduction into the mix, then you can tell that this is just in his DNA. Now, one of the cool things about having a loudspeaker business up in Canada is that it gives you access to the NRC, or National Research Center, where you can take in products like this, you can get them measured for free, and you can correlate those measurements to how we as people perceive sound. Now, while going to the NRC, he had the opportunity to study under the legendary Floyd E. Toole. In fact, there's just a lot of history here. He also got to work with Kevin Vicks, who is now known for his work with Revel. They also worked together on a number of projects, one of which being Mirage. And he also had some employees who left the company to start up their own business. You may have heard of them, Paradigm. So there's a whole bunch of history there. But now what I want to do is I want to switch gears into what it is that PSB is really going for with their products. As you can imagine, during the decades of work at the NRC, Paul has had the opportunity to conduct numerous studies, a lot of blind tests, and to really sit down and to understand that once you remove somebody's confirmation bias, what is it that people respond to the most, especially over the long haul when it comes to a good listening experience. So this has informed the direction that he's gone in. And basically what he's looking for is something that not only has a fairly linear frequency response, but he wants something that has good on and off axis performance, good coherency in terms of integration, and he wants to make sure that as you walk around a space, regardless of the acoustics of that space, that you're going to get a consistently good listening experience, almost regardless of the gear and, of course, as I just said, the room that you're in. And that, of course, leads me to the Alpha P5. So getting right to it, the P5 is a two-way rear-ported mini monitor. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, it retails for $350 a pair, and it also serves as the largest monitor within the Alpha lineup. Speaking of which, the latest Alpha series actually replaces the old Alpha series that's been in production for nearly 20 years. So hopefully, given that longevity, this line is going to be around for quite some time. Now, what I want to do is I want to take a closer look at some of the details about the P5, starting with this beautiful walnut wrap. Now, I know you can't really tell on camera because I suck with producing videos, but this is a really good looking wrap. In fact, it pretty much looks like a high quality wood veneer. And what's crazy is this wrap is actually imported from England to China to be used with the Alphas just because Paul really likes the company that makes this wrap. And having seen it in person, I totally get why. It's a pretty cool thing. Now, let's look at the front here and go over to drivers. Starting with the woofer, this is going to be a 5¼ inch woofer made mostly out of a polypropylene material. And what makes it unique is when you look at the rubber surround as it meets the cone, you're going to notice that it looks a little bit different. And when you put your hand on it, it's pretty thick. And what's going on there is this is to help dampen the woofer. That way, when energy is reflected back to the cone, it doesn't travel all the way through the cone to the voice coil. It just helps to mitigate that effect. Now, beneath that, we're going to notice a 3/4 inch metal dome tweeter. And I know what some of you are thinking, oh man, metal dome tweeters. Okay, I'm out. And I totally get where you're coming from. In fact, I asked Paul about that and he said, well, the reason why people respond that way to metal dome tweeters is because as they play higher frequencies, basically the center of the diaphragm stops moving and it's only the outside of the diaphragm on a metal dome that's actually moving. And this creates this spike that a lot of people really don't enjoy. And a good way around that is to design a proper phase plug, which according to Paul is incredibly difficult. The spacing has to be perfect. The size has to be perfect. You have to run a lot of simulations, a lot of real world tests, but when you do it right, it mitigates the effect of the metal dome. And having listened to them, I think he's definitely onto something there, because I know I probably wouldn't be able to tell in a blind test that I was listening to a metal dome. And you're also going to notice that it's enclosed in this little mini horn / waveguide. Now, this is not going to be for what you think. A lot of people will look at this and say, oh, well, that's for better power sensitivity and power handling. And instead, this is going to be more for controlled directivity and for phase, to make sure that the tweeter is more in phase with the woofer, especially as you move around the room, because it's very common for the tweeter and the woofer to go out of phase as people stand way above a product and start moving about. So this is designed to help make sure that the sound is always going to be in phase and even keeled no matter where you are, whether you're on or off axis. Now let's take a look at the back. So this is going to be our port. This is going to be a set of 5-way binding posts, and you're going to notice right here a hole. This is going to be for wall mounting brackets. Yes, if you're tight on space, you can put these near a wall. They're going to sound just fine. And that leads me to how they sound. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention that the P5s come with these cool metal grills, you know, just in case you care about that kind of thing. Anyways, now let's talk about the sound. Okay, so let's just go ahead and get this out of the way. Are these the best speakers that money can buy for $500 or less? Well, the answer is, of course not. I mean, how do you even quantify that? There are so many good products out there for the money that you really have to narrow down what it is you want in order to get any kind of answer there. But what I can say is that these are very special sounding speakers, and there's a few things they do that I think truly are exceptional for the money, starting with the mid-range performance, the driver integration, the seamlessness between the treble, the mid-range, and the bass, and of course the on and off axis performance. And that is going to lead me to the character of these speakers and what you could expect if you were to bring them home. So first, let's talk about how they project sound, because this isn't like Klipsch or the JBL Studios. They don't give you that forward, you are there at a rock concert experience. Instead, this is a speaker that you come home to, you sit down, and you listen into them. The sound is going to be more or less limited to the physical plane of the speakers. It takes on more of a laid-back character, but there's still going to be character there. In fact, when you listen to them, I would say that they take on more of that V-curve character. The treble is going to be boosted just a little bit, specifically at 10 kilohertz or above, and then you have the bass that's going to be boosted just a little bit. And that, of course, is going to lead me to the individual elements of the presentation, starting with the treble. So the treble is going to be very difficult for me to talk about just because it depends on the kind of gear you use and what your reference points are. For example, if you're used to Focal or Klipsch, then you're probably going to think the treble on these is positively smooth and rolled off. But really, when you get down to it, it is going to be boosted a little bit. I think the treble, for the price, is actually rather refined for what it is. I think there's really good tone. There's grit where it needs to be. If you're listening to something like, say, an acoustic guitar, I like the fact that there's bite to the sound. I like the fact that when the leading edge note hits, I mean, there's actual energy there. When it's trailing off, it captures the resonance very well. And again, gives it a good sense of tone. Now let's move on to the mid-range. The mid-range, hands down, the star of the show. Vocals, piano, stringed instruments, I don't care what it is, the mid-range just sounds really good. It almost reminds me of an affordable LS35A, just exceptionally well done. And now let's talk about the bass. So the bass does have this warm character. Like I said, there's that mild V curve going on, so it is boosted just a little bit. But I noticed that it doesn't sound like it's ever trying to be more than what it is. This isn't a small speaker that's desperately trying to sound big. It just produces good low end for something of its size. Now let's talk about near field listening, because a lot of people are going to want to know, can they work near a wall? And the answer is yes. In fact, I will even go on record as to saying that as of now, these are my favorite near field monitors, because in that environment and for desktop use, the sound integrates together very well. Really good driver integration. You don't need to put a lot of distance between yourself and the speakers, and you just get this really nice full presentation that just works so well in that kind of environment. So highly recommended there. Moving on, let's talk about dynamics. Dynamic range is going to be very good for a compact monitor. Most of the times, dynamics on small monitors suck, and while they're definitely not going to move the kind of air a big speaker can, I think you'd be surprised by how they handle crescendos. You give them the right kind of horsepower, and they can do it pretty well. Speaking of which, these speakers are relatively efficient for what they are, but they still respond best to a good 30 watts or more per channel. I think for most people, 50 to 60 is where you're going to want to be. Next, let's talk about imaging. When it comes to imaging, I would say that they're good. They don't cast the widest soundstage in the world, but they are pretty good at placing instruments within the soundstage. There's decent focus between them, and most importantly, there's a lot of layering to the soundstage, so it feels like there's just a lot of depth to the sound, and that really complements their more natural, laid-back nature. And lastly, the only thing that I need to comment on is the musical experience. I think these are, subjectively speaking, very engaging and charming sounding speakers. A lot of the times when I go through the reviewing process, I sit down, I evaluate them, I take notes, or I just keep it all up here. I film the review and then I move on. With these speakers, I actually had a lot of fun listening to music and would oftentimes just play it in the background as I went about my business doing other things. So yeah, very charming speakers. I can see why a lot of people like them, but they're not going to be perfect though, so let's get to those imperfections now. Okay, so for $350, you're getting something that looks great, has killer tone, has great driver integration, and has the kind of sound that you can listen to for a long time, hopefully without fatigue. So there's not really a whole lot to criticize. I mean, yes, I could go on about how certain speakers sound bigger, or certain speakers put you more into rock concert than these do, and all of that's very true, but you guys already know this by now, so let me go on to the only criticism that I can find, which is this. While PSB designed these speakers to work well in a wide variety of rooms and across a wide variety of equipment types, I feel like they sound best when paired to electronics that are either neutrally voiced and or just a little bit rolled off along the top end. And I say that because that's when I feel like these speakers sound the most natural. Whenever I paired them up to components that are a little bit brighter, I noticed that the treble basically took over the presentation of this speaker, thus kind of ruining the balance that it has to offer. Now obviously not everybody's going to run into this, and some people may not even notice it, but it's something that I nonetheless want to point out. Otherwise, these are very well-rounded speakers, and that leads me to my final thoughts. So let's be honest, you guys knew that this was going to be a positive review, and subjectively speaking, I admit that these speakers check off a lot of the boxes that I associate with a good listening experience. Really good tone, excellent mid-range performance, good driver integration, good on and off axis performance, and most importantly, an engaging, charming sound that just makes me want to sit down and listen to music, not for this review, but for the sake of actually listening to music. I think there's something to be said about that. Now, are they the best speakers that money can buy for $500 or less? That's impossible to say. There are tons of great, valid options out there, and we're lucky to have those options. But I will also say this. I think there are tons of people out there who are going to enjoy the P5s, and there's probably nothing else that they would rather own with that kind of money. Anyways, guys, that's just going to be my take on these speakers. As always, I appreciate you watching, and until next time, peace. Okay, so what you're about to watch right now is pure fan service, and I'm only doing this because I've had enough of you ask me about how the P5s compare to the 600Ms to where I realize that you're not going to be the only ones, so I want to answer that question here and now. And yes, for you pedantic individuals watching this, I realize this is not a fair matchup. I realize a more fair matchup would be the T20s versus these speakers and or the lower end clips compared to the P5s, but I don't have those on hand, and plus this is what people are going to want to know about anyways. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about the sound. And it pretty much goes as you would expect. The clip speakers are much larger and they project a much larger sense of scale. The mid-range, the bass, the highs, all of it has a lot more energy and prominence. The top end is going to be brighter compared to the PSBs, and the clips is going to project sound in a much more forward way. So if you're somebody who has a big space to fill and or you listen at loud volumes, or maybe you have a low powered amp because these are easier to drive, and or maybe you just like that kind of sound, you want to make it sound as though there's a live musical event taking place in your room, the clips are going to be the easy choice here if you're cross-shopping the two. However, the PSBs have some advantages themselves. I feel like the mid-range tone on the PSBs is going to be superior. I feel like the top end is just a little bit more articulate sounding than the clips, and also feel like the driver integration on the PSBs is going to be superior. But really, when you break it down, both speakers are exceptional for what they are. It just depends on what you're after. Anyways, hopefully this answered some questions for you guys, and now for real this time, peace.